The 2024 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by Glossica.
Okay, guys, thank you for waiting and sorry for technical problems. I would like to invite you for Connecting Cultures Through Language Exchange by Michel Kubitza and Tobias Dickmeis. And please remember that you can always ask questions in Slido app. Can we have Slido for a moment? Slido. Okay, then don't hear us, but I hope you have the Slido from previous talks. Oh yeah, we have QR code, so you can scan it right now. And if you have any question, you can ask, and all answers will be at the end of the talk. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Tobias, I'm a co-founder of Tandem and responsible for the product at Tandem.
And my name is Michelle. I'm responsible for some of the group learning experiences we have on Tandem, and I'm also currently working on how to integrate AI into language exchange.
Yeah, so Tandem is a language exchange community, and our mission is to connect the world through languages. And it has these two aspects. It's about language practice, language learning, but also about cultural exchange. And this second part is what we want to focus on today with our talk on connecting cultures through language exchange. And we want to exemplify how that works by showing some data from our community and also tell some stories from members of our community, how they go about their language exchange leading to cultural exchange as well. But first, for those who have never heard of Tandem, so it's a global language community with currently 28 million members. You can practice 300 languages on Tandem, including 20 sign languages. And in any given week, there are more than 4,500 combinations of languages practiced on Tandem. And on this map, you see the countries where we have the biggest communities of members. It's the US, Mexico, Brazil. Then in Europe, France, Germany, Italy, Turkey, Russia, China, and Japan. And if you want to join the community, you just have to download the Tandem app from the App Store. You set up a profile where you tell us which languages you learn and which ones you speak. And then we show you a list of people who speak the languages you learn and learn the languages you speak. And you can jump into a messaging experience with them and practice with text messages, audio messages. You can also do audio and video calls. And this messenger, compared to other messengers like WhatsApp, for example, has a couple of language learning features. You can correct each other's messages, for example. You can transliterate messages. So it helps you to go about doing a language exchange in the messenger. We also have live audio rooms that we call language parties. So at any given time, there are dozens of these rooms online, live. You can also start your own ones. And you can join and you can just listen in. You can go on stage and talk yourself. And these rooms, these language parties, are often also around cultural exchange topics. They, of course, have a language, but also the topics that are discussed are often around the culture. Yeah, and then let's start to look into data that tells us a bit about the cultural connections on Tandem. This first section is the most popular countries that people in our top countries practice with. If you like the Eurovision Song Contest, not primarily for the music, but for that procedure afterwards where the countries give each other points, which sometimes, of course reflects the music, but also often tells a lot about cultural affiliations and maybe even historical affiliations, then you're going to like this next section as well. So this is a map that shows these top 10 communities that I showed before, and with which communities they have the most exchanges. So in the US, that's Brazil. In Mexico, it's the US. In Brazil, it's the US as well. Of course, these combinations are influenced by people's preferences for languages, but you can also see here these connections in the Americas that it often has to do with things like being in the same time zone. And also is a reflection of the biggest communities we have. We just have a lot of users in Brazil, a big community in Brazil, so it's not surprising that also in a lot of countries, Brazil is the top country that people have conversations with. That's the case, for example, in France and Italy as well. Then Turkey and Russia are a good match. So in Turkey, the Russian community is the most popular, and the other way around, in Russia, the Turkish community. Also interestingly, in China, the biggest community that people have conversations with is Russia. And then Germany and Japan are kind of special markets here because the most popular community is in the country itself. The reason for this is that a lot of users use Tandem. We call it the expat use case. So you're already in the country, you want to learn the language there, and then you primarily converse with people who are also in the country. Then we get to the second most popular country. In the US, that's Russia. In Mexico, that's Brazil. In Brazil, it's France. In France, it's Mexico. It's Russia this time in both Italy and Germany. And in Turkey, we have the expat use case again, with Turkey being number 2. In Russia, it's China. And in China, it's the US. And in Japan, the US as well. And yeah, I think here it shows that there may be some combinations that are not that expected if you just look at the world through like a sort of lens of which countries kind of are culturally and politically affiliated. For example, Russia being the number 2 in the US and the US being the number 2 in China is not so expected. But yeah, this shows how these cultural connections work in our community. And then, just to wrap it up, the third most popular country in the US, that's Mexico. In Mexico, it's France. In Brazil, it's Mexico as well. This time it's the US in France, Mexico in Italy, and now it's Brazil in both Germany and in Turkey. And in Russia, it's the US. And then in both China and Japan, we have 2 countries that are not in the top 10 markets. So in China, it's Indonesia. And in Japan, it's Korea. Korean, interestingly, the only language since we're doing Tandem, which is more than 9 years, where we see a steady increase in the interest in the language, while the other languages is kind of stable. What percentages of our community are learning English or Spanish, for example. But Korea has been on the rise in the last years, and that shows here in being the third most popular country for our Japanese users to have conversations with. Yeah, that's probably all still a bit abstract, so I want to hand it over to Michelle to add some flavor and color to this by showing us some more data, but also a few stories from our community that show how the cultural exchange through language exchange happens on Tandem.
So we have conducted a survey among our users, and there were more than 4,000 people who answered our questions in several languages. So you will see, as Toby just said, some numbers, but also stories in several languages. Whenever it's not in English, please don't worry, I will translate later. So first of all, we wanted to know about the interest in different cultures and languages. And 81% say their interest in different cultures and languages increased since they started using Tandem. And here we have a very good picture of why it is like that. Conocí personas de lugares que no sabía que existían y me motivó a buscar información acerca de esos lugares, que es un plus a mi idea inicial de aprender inglés. So this person initially just wanted to learn English. This is why they came to Tandem. But then all of a sudden they got to know persons from other places they have never even heard about before, and they were motivated to look for some information about those places too. And then a similar quote by somebody who is German speaking. Habe noch nie vorher über Kasachstan nachgedacht und jetzt fast täglich. So this person has never even thought about Kazakhstan before, even though it's not a really small country, but now they think about it daily. So they must have met somebody from there and have conversations with them now due to their language exchange. Now let's concentrate on languages. 62% say using Tandem motivated them to learn more languages than they had originally intended. You might know this feeling as well. Maybe you have it here on the Polyglot gathering, that you want to learn more languages than you actually had in mind. 57% said they learned one more language. About a third 2 more languages, and then 12 brave percent learned more than 2 languages, additionally to the ones they originally intended. And we wanted to know, why is that? And here 55% say they learned more languages than originally intended because they met people from other countries on Tandem and became interested in their languages and cultures. And here is a short story of somebody who did exactly this. Interacting with people from Indonesia made me want to learn more about their culture. They are good people. Some even became close friends. This interest made me so excited to learn also some words from the language, which is something unexpected and not planned at all. Now I decided to visit Indonesia and meet my friends as well. So it can start with a language exchange, but then actually you become friends and want to visit this country too. So it has far-reaching consequences. And coming back to culture, we also wanted to know about, have you learned anything about your own culture? And 82% say their interactions on Tandem made them reflect on their own culture. And spoiler alert, most of this is about food and drinks. So here we go. In England, we drink tea with milk, but in Poland and probably other parts of the world, they do not. One friend I met on Tandem told me that drinking tea with milk is the equivalent to eating chocolate with cucumber. I never knew it was that strange of a thing, so a clear learning here about the own culture. I learned that in Italy, they don't break spaghetti into pieces. It's a taboo there, but in Africa, it's not. So when I talked to my Italian colleague about this, he said, it takes hours to make the spaghetti long. Why would you break them? So this gives you something to think about after the talk. And then another quote by a Brazilian person. I learned about having any meal as lunch, and now, as a Brazilian, I don't eat rice and beans every day like in the past. So also some really important reflection about their own lifestyle here. And we have one more story that is not about food. Lo otro es el poner de costumbre la limpieza del suelo de mi casa para andar descalzo, ya que es algo siempre quise hacer. So this person actually always wanted to walk barefoot in their own apartment, but just couldn't do it because the floor was not clean. On Tandem, they learned they could clean it regularly, and then they could walk barefoot. So real life hacks you can learn during your language exchange. Now that we thought about our own culture, let's talk about the other cultures. 81% say interacting with people from different cultures on Tandem changed their attitude or perception toward those cultures. And we have a really interesting quote here from somebody from the US saying, getting to know a couple of Russians, I was surprised at how much we had in common. That experience has changed how I think of Russia. And then a similar one about the Chinese culture. Americans are incredibly limited on unbiased information about the average lives of Chinese people. It has been eye-opening meeting so many kind and interesting people from China, and getting to share their culture makes me feel incredibly happy and privileged. So here again, you can see the categories are a little mixed. This person has learned a lot about another culture, but also about their own at the same time. And then this one, which I find also quite funny. Being prejudiced about Nordic countries is a little bit unnecessary. They are kind people. So sometimes it just takes one conversation with somebody from this country to get an impression about them and change your perception and your attitude. And then we also wanted to talk about some more serious topics, so global issues here. 78% say using Tandem increased their awareness of global issues affecting different countries. I have learned that the media portray many countries in a bad way, and most of it is simply untrue. And then we have a similar one from a German-speaking person. Ich habe einen Tandem-Freund aus Kolumbien und er hat mir viel über die Stereotypen erzählt, die über sein Land existieren und jetzt in so vielen Drogenserien auf Netflix vorkommen und seiner Meinung nach auch nicht stimmen. So this person has gotten to know somebody on Tandem from Colombia, and they talked about the stereotypes in Netflix series about drugs and other stuff going on in Colombia. And this Colombian friend told them that it's actually not all true, and it's a lot of stereotypes in those series. So similar to the quote before with the media and this one, you can see that also the direct contact to persons in the country can completely change your attitude and your perception of the country, something you can't see from the media because sometimes it's really just one perspective. And then something more positive here. I discovered and affirmed positive things too, such as how friendships are made among younger generations between nations that are politically not considered allies. So we will talk about this topic a little further on in the presentation. And now that we talked a lot about the thinking and the perceptions, have people actually adopted any cultural practices? And here it's about a third, a little more, who adopted cultural practices or traditions from people they met on Tandem. And first one about food again. I learned about arepas, a staple of Venezuela and Colombia. I learned how to make them, and now they are a favorite of my family. So if you're ever in desperate need of new dishes and recipes, just start a language exchange and you will get them. Filipino culture gives emphasis on respect to elders, even by just 1 year, like appellations such as kuya and ate. This means something like brother and sister, and it's really something typical in the Philippines that you address people to respect them with those names instead of their own name. But Europeans are liberal regarding addressing people. For them, calling somebody by their name isn't rude at all. So this might be the perspective most of you also know. If somebody came to you and called you brother or sister, it might be a little strange if they're not close to you. And then you would tell them, well, just call me by my name, I'm Michelle. And this has really helped me tons, because I plan to settle in Europe. If I do, I won't be perceived as naive by natives, because I now know their customs and practices. So here again, sometimes it's very valuable to have a personal exchange with somebody, because these are the little things of the cultures you might not learn in language learning apps or in textbooks. And finally, we wanted to know, have people become more open towards other cultures? And a really big number says, yes, they think their interactions on Tandem have helped them to become more open towards other cultures. On Tandem, I had a fascinating cultural exchange with an Australian friend. We talked about their love for the outdoors and surfing culture. I shared insights into Chinese history and traditions. This interaction taught me that despite our differences, we share a mutual respect for nature and each other's cultures. It was a truly enriching experience. So here again, you can see that sometimes it doesn't matter where you are or how different your cultures might be, you will find something in common with a person from another culture. If it's your love for nature, for music, for dancing, for food, we saw it's a really popular topic today. You will find something, and you should concentrate on these things you have in common and not on the 100 differences you might find as well. And last but not least, I'd like to also give you some very important learning from this survey. Dank Tandem weiß ich jetzt, dass nicht alle Deutschen kalt und ernst sind. So thanks to Tandem, I know now that not all Germans are cold and serious. And with this quite important learning, I hand the microphone back to Tobias.
Yeah, so what we also wanted to do is put a special spotlight on connections in our community between people from countries and regions where the cultural boundaries are considered a bit higher or bigger than elsewhere. And we kind of separated this into 3 groups of countries and regions. The first one we called sports rivalry. So these are connections between countries that often have quite close political ties, economical ties, also cultural ties. But when it comes to their national teams playing against each other in football, for example, or hockey, this is not a match like any other, and it can come with quite some tension. And this tension is, of course, also often rooted in some level of resentment and prejudice and so on. And we just counted how many conversations between members from such countries and regions have happened on Tandem in 2024 so far. And it's 150,000, and it's between members from countries like Argentina, Brazil, Canada, US, Greece and Turkey, Spain, Portugal, and also Germany and the Netherlands. And then the second category where we looked at the same kind of numbers, we called contentious relationships. These are countries, that are definitely rivals. They are not necessarily in like open armed conflicts, but they're definitely considered rivals on the global stage in economical and other power relationships. It's mainland China and the US, mainland China and Taiwan, Russia and the US, US and Iran, and the US and Cuba. And these are also often countries where you maybe even taught in school that the other country is some kind of arch enemy, and a certain percentage of the population really believes that people from that other country are not very well-meaning, not very friendly. The media probably portrays the country in a certain light, and there are probably also politicians who portray these other countries in a certain light. And between countries and regions like this, we saw 350,000 conversations this year so far on Tandem. And then the third category is countries and regions that are in open armed conflicts: Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine, Iran and Israel, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And here we saw 15,000 conversations so far facilitated through Tandem. So all in all, it's more than 500,000 conversations just on Tandem, which is of course not the only language exchange platform out there, where people from these kind of countries and regions that are maybe not considered best friends get in touch with each other and have a cultural exchange and a language exchange with each other. But we also don't want this to sound like it's all great on Tandem and rosy and Tandem is making the world a better place. And so we also wanted to talk a bit about the challenges that we see when you bring people from all corners of the world together on a platform to communicate with each other. And I think starting on this journey, and still we very much have the wish that everyone who joins our community is friendly, open-minded, kind, respectful. But unfortunately, that's not always the case, and there are lots of interactions with each other that are more like on the negative side. And some of them you could maybe file under cultural misunderstandings, but some you just can't. And over the years that we've been doing Tandem, we had to take a couple of tough decisions regarding that. For example, one is that Tandem is not available in certain countries in the app stores. These countries could probably be best described as having the biggest inequalities between genders compared to other countries in the world. And that shows then in behavior of primarily those who identify as males from this country and the way they interact with those who identify as females from other countries. And for a small company or organization like us, we just had to realize that it's impossible for us to hire so many moderators who would moderate these things and take action on those bad actors, that we just couldn't really help ourselves but take the app out of the App Store in those countries. And it's of course not in line with our mission. We want to connect the world through languages and not just a part of the world. Another inequality that shows up is economical inequalities between different parts of the world, and the way that shows up is in groups of members from countries who are more economically not very privileged, trying to scam, trying to commit fraud, where the victims, the targets of their operations are people in countries where they believe people have deeper pockets. And that has become a big part of our work that we also didn't really expect when we set out on this journey, that we would need to become experts in these scams and scam routines and how they operate and understanding what playbooks they have. And of course, it's a bit of an arms race. We detect a certain playbook, a certain scam routine. We try to put actions in to stop it, and then they come up with something new. They've also become more and more professional over the years, and we kind of have to keep up in our efforts and in our resources that we put into protecting our community from such scams and fraud attacks. When you talk to them, they often justify it, probably also in front of themselves, with some kind of Robin Hood approach. They're taking it from the rich and giving it to a poor. But of course, that's if you go very deeper into what happens and what also happens to people who become victims of these frauds, is of course not a perspective we can take on this. And then maybe a third area that's goes in the direction of what topics do we want to see being discussed in language exchanges on Tandem. And that's primarily important for what happens in more of the public space of Tandem, which is these audio rooms that everybody can join. And we started with kind of an approach where we said, it's language exchange, it's cultural exchange, all topics that fall under this bracket should be allowed. But we already realized early on that especially topics around religion and politics started to be more polarizing, started to lead to heated discussions, also toxic discussions, and somehow didn't really help in bringing out the respectful, helpful, constructive side in people, but more like the opposite of that. But for the longest time, we were like watching this, and I still remember around 2 years ago when the war in Ukraine started, that there were lots of conversations between members from Ukraine and from Russia, and some of them were maybe like crossing certain boundaries, but all in all, we had the impression it has a net positive effect. It's a room where people can exchange their perspectives and their views and exchange whatever they hear on their media about it. And we kind of, didn't take any action there. But then, fast forward 1.5 years later, in the last fall, with the events that happened in the Middle East, we were watching it for a couple of weeks, but eventually had to decide that we have to stop allowing these topics to be discussed on Tandem, because it just became too heated, too toxic. There were groups kind of getting together and kind of waging their own little wars on our platform against each other by coordinating reporting attacks on certain users they wanted to have off the platform. And of course, discussions also got very heated and very out of hand. And it was a very difficult decision, because we still consider politics and religion part of cultural exchange, and why shouldn't they be discussed if it's done in a constructive and respectful way? But we couldn't really help ourselves and not allow them anymore. I do not want to give up the hope so that we can revert this discussion at this ban of these topics at some point again. And why we don't want to give up this hope, I want to just show one last quote for this presentation that maybe highlights it best. This is a feedback we received sometime last year before we actually introduced this ban of these topics from a user. And she wrote, in a language party, a woman from Ukraine and a woman from Russia expressed their sympathy for each other on a deeply sincere level. The Ukrainian woman lived in a city that was being repeatedly attacked. It was very touching for everyone present. For me, this moment was a ray of hope in the face of all the human tragedy, because everyone saw each other as human beings and not as enemies or strangers from different countries. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions. All right. The first question, okay. How often does Tandem conduct user research, and what's the percentage of qualitative and quantitative research? That's even hard to quantify. We are constantly conducting user research. Quantitative research is also simply every day looking at the data that we see about the usage of our platform, and it happens on a daily basis. And then bigger research projects we start when we have bigger questions, when we want to find out something, when we want to figure out certain aspects of the usage of Tandem, the interest in maybe new offerings, new features. That's when we then start bigger research projects around this to simply get more clarity on taking the right decisions. Do you have any practical suggestions, advice to kickstart a conversation with strangers on the platform, especially for people who are more introverted? Michelle, also feel free to.
I mean, yeah, okay, now it's working. Some of the things that work very well are those topics that you would usually discuss maybe in a language learning situation too. So you shouldn't forget that this is all about language exchange, and you can always come back to your structures you already know. Most of you have already learned a language in a more structural way, with textbooks in the school, wherever. And you could get back to those situations, talking about traveling, about family, about all of those topics that you already know and that you feel comfortable with. So I would always suggest to start the conversation with comfortable topics, and then you could see if it matches well with this person, if you have really good conversations, and you can talk about more deeper topics as well, for example.
Yeah, then the next question is, because AI was mentioned at the beginning, what's the role of machine learning on Tandem's roadmap? What are some potential use cases? Oh yeah, we could probably do another talk on this. Where we use machine learning already is in trying to suggest the best exchange partners to each other. That's been going on for a while, and also before the whole generative AI capabilities came to the scene. We definitely have a vision where we see that the core of the interactions on Tandem are between two humans, but we can probably, with the help of AI, and especially generative AI, do a better job in using Tandem as a learning platform, but also what Michelle just talked about, facilitating conversations better, especially for those who are struggling to get beyond a small talk in a language exchange. And we've started already. If you use Tandem in the web version, you will see more and more of these features of building little AI features that just simply help you better to learn. For example, we have the correction feature on Tandem, where you receive a correction from your exchange partner. And if that correction doesn't come with a really good explanation from their side, you can now ask AI to explain you what exactly you did wrong based on the correction that your exchange partner made for you. And probably much more to come, but probably worth a whole talk for itself. Anything to add from your side? Okay, how many users use Tandem as a dating app? Maybe I can, there are probably some Tandem users here in the room, so I can pass this question back. Who is using Tandem as a dating app? Any arms go up? None, okay. Yeah, I'm afraid this is not a proper representation of what we see in the community. Of course, we see this in all our data that in this language exchanges on Tandem, there are certain gender dynamics in play, and the majority of exchanges are between those who identify as male and those who identify as female. And we intentionally, of course, don't position Tandem as a dating app, because that would just attract too many people with the wrong intention. On the other hand, if people meet each other on Tandem, they help each other with their languages, and they fall in love, and they send us wedding invitations or photos of their babies, we don't consider it a bad outcome of what we are doing. But it's a very, very, let's say, balancing act, because we also hear too often experiences, often from users who identify as female, who get into the platform, and the first couple of messages they received are from guys who ask them if they're single or send them photos, and this is the behavior we don't want to see on Tandem. And if you're a user on Tandem, please always report these, because this is the strongest signal for us that somebody is not a good match for our community if they go about approaching people in those ways. Are there challenges of balancing the equal amount of language practice between two users from a user experience perspective?
Yes, definitely, especially if the levels are different. So it might be that, for example, me as a German, I'm trying to learn Portuguese. and a person from Brazil is trying to learn German, but they have already learned it for 2 years, and I'm just starting. So what usually develops naturally is that you start to speak in the language that both feel comfortable in. So there are definitely challenges. When you're about the same level and you're on a high level, then it's quite easy. You can just talk in one language, switch to the others. It's more or less natural as well. If both are beginners, that's actually the hardest, because then you got to get speaking. So this is where language exchange doesn't work that easy as if you were already on a higher level. So try to find out first about the level, and then try to set some guidelines, what you want to actually practice, how much you want to practice, and which style. So you could also do 30 minutes this language and then 30 this one with a timer if you want to have strict rules. But you could also say, well, let's see, we can talk about this in this language today, and next time we talk in another, to not have this interruption in the middle. So there are some challenges, but there are strategies to overcome them.
Then what is your personal vision for the future of Tandem? Where would you like to develop the app, and towards which goal in the next 10 years? Wow, probably also a topic for a talk in itself, and 10 years is a pretty long time frame. I mean, first and foremost, we want to grow our community. We think we've already scratched the surface of how many people we can reach, how many people we can help to get language exchange, language practice, but also all the cultural exchange that we talked about today. We, of course, also know, like with any app, that if the app looks exactly the same in 10 years than it's now, it's probably not be relevant anymore. So any kind of development further of just getting better at finding the right exchange partners and getting into a fruitful and exchange that really has learning value. That's what we want to do. And yeah, we talked about AI before. There's a lot of technology out there that wasn't available when we started out, and making the right use of this technology is also on our roadmap. Then what are the chances to find a tandem partner for exchanging less common languages, like, for instance, Latin? Latin is actually not too bad. Of course, you don't find hundreds of thousands of exchange partners like you would find for Spanish, for example, but a few hundred for sure on the app. And I can just invite you to check it out. Put your language combination in there and then see how many people you find. Of course, not limited too much by because we have filters on Tandem. I only want to see people in a certain country, on a certain age group. Of course, keep like very wide filters there and very wide limits. And then even for like quite exotic language combinations and smaller languages, you might find maybe just a handful of people, but they will definitely be very motivated, just like you, about that language. Then, do you make partnerships with language schools? And if so, how does it work? Good question. We've done this in the past. We did some experiments there, but we get into like marketing now and how to market a digital product. It felt like for a small operation like us, where we are a small team where everybody has different roles, very hard to scale it to really get Tandem a presence or in like all language schools around the world. If you have a language school, of course, approach us and we can send you flyers and things like that. There's also a certain chance that most of the students already know Tandem and use it, but we don't have like a structured program how to work together with language schools, simply because the return on investment in terms of the marketing effort didn't prove to be worth it. As a digital product, it's always easier to market your product in a digital space where someone's always only one click away from downloading your app in the App Store than being somewhere offline present, or ads somewhere in the subway or something. There's always more friction in this, and it's also harder to measure of this. And yeah, for a company that has to be very lean, this just didn't prove to be a way for us to grow well. Are there also insights on negative experiences people had interacting with others on the platform? How do you deal with them? Yeah, of course, lots of insights, and I think I kind of highlighted 3 areas when I talked about the challenges. People who get approached by others in disrespectful ways, often with a certain dating angle. people getting approached or even becoming victims of scammers and fraudsters on Tandem. And the third one is just finding yourself in a conversation that's not respectful and that's rude and harassing. And for all of these, we have different measures. And I can only repeat again that we rely a lot on the signals we get from the community and reporting, because we're not one of these platforms that constantly monitors chats. We have we have a very German privacy approach there. So we're also relying on getting feedback and then drawing the right conclusions from it. And then we have a 24/7 community team, community moderating team that tries to react as quickly as possible to these reports and then takes action in terms of warning users or banning them. Yeah, I'm not sure if this properly answers the question, but it would also be a not very happy presentation in itself to look at these negative interactions that happen on Tandem. Bottom line is still, we still are very much convinced that we have a net positive effect, and the vast majority of interactions on Tandem are positive. But yeah, like I said, unfortunately, the world is not just full of friendly, kind, and well-meaning people, and that also shows on our platform.
Also in the quotes I presented to you, there were, of course, some negative answers as well in the survey. And it's actually just like in life, so it's not only on the app, but you cannot connect with everybody, and you might have bad experiences about that as well. I still remember one quote, maybe I can bring it to you here. There was one person saying they always felt like they were born in the wrong country, and after interacting with several people from all over the world, they felt like they were in the wrong planet. So there might also be people who are just not finding friends maybe over this app.
Next question, do you foresee that talking to generative AI instead of actual people can replace human-human interaction for language learning? Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I do actually foresee that in like slightly different use cases. We actually did an experiment ourselves about a year ago where we launched an AI chatbot language exchange partner. The experience we made there was that there was a certain group of users interested in this, but it was quite small. There was also next to no willingness to pay for it, and as using this technology is quite expensive, we wouldn't be able to offer it as a free offer. But the way that generative AI progresses, especially the presentation you might have seen over the last days from OpenAI, but also at Google I/O, I think we're getting to a point where the generative AI language tutor, for example, gets very close to an interaction you might have with a real tutor. And in that space of kind of learning languages even from scratch, because the current chatbots are usually only useful if you already speak the language a bit, I could definitely foresee that there are new products out there and new offerings out there. What we know from Tandem, though, is that most people come to us because they're looking not just for a way to learn a language or practice a language, but they're also interested in making friends worldwide. And that will, fortunately or hopefully, not be replaced by AI anytime soon. Why isn't it possible to add people as friends and see when they're online, like in other chat softwares? Well, we do have something like this. We just call it following and not friends. Every user can, though, opt out of being seen if they're online. We'll also probably in the next half year launch a special feature for that will highlight the people even more that are online right now amongst your existing connections. But you can technically see in the app who's online right now. You just have to go to their profile, and it's not really easy to filter by that. If that was the last question, I saw some other questions before, but they disappeared again. So, and time's up. So yeah, thank you very much. If you have any questions, yeah. But of course, yeah, find us afterwards for any questions, and yeah, also any feedback on Tandem, any complaints, just approach us, and very happy to have a conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the speech, and yes, you can always find them and ask questions, I hope, of course. So thank you so much.